in Matthew chapter 27. So we probably have about, 2 or 3 more classes in Matthew. Getting ready to, as we're kind of wrapping it up here, or like I said, probably be 2 or 3 more classes or so before we're completely done with it. But then once we do that, the plan is to move into Acts and start kind of just keeping on with what happens after Jesus is resurrected and all that. So that is the plan that's coming up here. But tonight we are in Matthew chapter 27, and we are going to start in verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now, at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So, when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that religious man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. So Pilate is trying to keep a riot from happening, and yet on the other hand, he knows that there's this guy who he knows is innocent. Right? He knows this guy is innocent. He knows that he shouldn't let this guy be killed. So Pilate has this political pressure to keep the peace here, but for some reason the Jews have it in for this guy. And it does say that Pilate knew that it was out of envy. It was out of envy that they delivered him up. And besides that, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." So he's getting warnings. His conscience is kind of giving him a warning there. His wife is declaring that this is a just man. So he's got these things going on, and thinking about the issue of her sending word to him about her dream may also highlight something else. Does Pilate really care if the Jews kill one of their people? In the bigger scheme of things, as we walk through this, it's kind of interesting that Pilate has any qualms of conscience at all. It's not like he actually cares, right? One Jew dies, another Jew dies. Who cares? As far as he's concerned. But when I hear about this dream, there's this idea of, well, wait a minute. If I kill this just man, this may come back to haunt me later. So I think maybe there's a little bit of superstition going on here with Pilate, maybe with his wife as well. It's not, I don't want to start a riot However, I also have this kind of superstitious side that says, if I kill an innocent man, and now my wife has had this dream, so the gods are they obviously have a hand in this, and I'm going to be in trouble. And he seems to be weighing these things out. He seems to be kind of figuring out what he needs to be doing here. And in the end, he goes toward saving himself politically, it seems like, trying to stop this riot from taking place. That seems to be kind of what takes precedence in the end. And then there's the theater of washing his hands before the crowd and saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. I mean, you can't really do that. I mean, you're the one who's in authority. This is your moment. This is where you stand up, and you're going to be counted one way or another. You've got to make the decision. You have to decide. And as difficult as a place as that might be, you can't just delegate that or send that off to them. I mean, you can't just get rid of that. You have to take that responsibility. And it's really interesting that he says, this man's blood is not going to be on my hands, because Matthew makes it clear that Pilate, had Jesus scourged, right? He was the one who had him scourged. He was the one who delivered him over to be crucified. So this is by his command. This is happening because he is saying this. So, he doesn't get to wash himself of that guilt. He doesn't get to wash himself of that shame. So, and I also wonder how many people today actually, in our culture, realize that this idea of washing my hands of this, I wonder if they really know where it comes from. I wonder if they understand that this is where it comes from. And, I know that we as Christians know that, but it's kind of like, there's a lot of people who think here in America that Abraham Lincoln is the first one to say a house divided against itself will not stand, right? I hear that quote given to Abraham Lincoln quite often. They don't realize that's actually Jesus. That was something that Jesus had said. And there's a lot of statements like that come from the Bible, and people think that they came from Shakespeare and other places. And I just find that interesting. So Pilate is walking through this theater, this public display, and in his mind he's got this political thing going on. He's got this superstition thing going on, and here's how I'll deal with the political thing. It's like, I'll go ahead and I'll have him executed, and that'll kind of deal with that side of it. And here's how I'll deal with the superstitions. Whatever I think is going on or happening in the spiritual world, I'll try to demonstrate that it's really not me. It's not my fault. What else could I have done? I had to do this. And so I think that's how he's maybe rationalizing, or maybe trying to figure out and handle both sides of this dilemma that he's in. And I think that this is a common response to Jesus and the gospel today. So many want to just kind of sit on the fence and say, well, maybe it's true. Maybe Jesus is the Son of God. Maybe he did die and rose again, and then again, maybe not. And they try to wash their hands of it. They try to wash their hands of the responsibility, trying to wash their hands of Christ, trying to wash their hands of the guilt of their sins. But those who are denying Jesus wholesale, who are just being agnostic about it, there are very few who are saying, you know what, just in case it's true, just in case it's true, just in case he is who he said he is, I'm going to surrender my life to Jesus, and I'm going to do what he said. There are very few who are actually saying that. Most folks are saying, you know what, I'm just going to do whatever it is that I want to do. And Lord, if you really are out there, I just hope that you'll overlook this because, it's not really my fault. I mean, if you'd made it more clear, then, it might have made a difference. Maybe if you'd written me a letter or 27 letters, maybe that would have made a difference. Maybe that would have helped me. I don't know. And besides that, there are others who are way more or way worse than I am. And, I'm not the worst person in the world. In fact, I know some of those who claim to follow you, and they're worse than I am. And so I just think these are things that we can do to try to wash our hands of the whole thing and try not to take responsibility, try not to have to worry about it or accept it, And, I think it's really interesting, too, that when Pilate took the water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood, see to it yourselves, I find it really interesting that all the people answered, his blood be on us and on our children. I mean, Pilate pronounces that the blood of this guy, of this person, is just. That this is a just person. And he wants nothing to do with it. And yet the crowd seems more than happy to step in and say, oh, is that what you need to hear? All right, fine. Fine, his blood be on us and on our children. And I just find that chilling. It's chilling to hear them say, let the blood of the Messiah be on us and on our children. And of course, they're able to say that because they don't really think that he's the Messiah. So they can say that. And interestingly, in about 50 days or so, they're going to be really upset with the apostles for putting the blood of Jesus on them. But on this day, they're okay with that. Now, I think about Pilate and contrasting that with with Judas, because the issue here is shame and guilt. Judas recognized his shame and guilt, and the only honorable way that he felt that he could deal with that was to execute himself. Pilate, on the other hand, in order to try and deal with his shame and guilt, tries to pretend like what he's doing isn't really worthy of shame or guilt. I'll just wash my hands of this, which means that I don't have to feel guilty. I don't have to feel shame. And these are approaches that, in a different way that we, I think, will take at times. Sometimes in order to escape our shame and our guilt, we try to figuratively wash our hands, right? Well, what we did wasn't really all that bad, or it wasn't wrong, or you're worse than I am, so therefore it didn't really count, or you did something to me first, and so that made it okay, or everybody's doing it, so it must mean that it's fine. It's not really that big of a deal. And we may not turn on the water and pull out the soap and do this whole ritual display thing for everyone to see, but these are our means of trying to escape the shame and the guilt and trying to justify ourselves. We're trying to wash our hands of the things that we do. So I just think it's interesting. We'll try to justify ourselves. We'll try to rationalize. But again, it's just theater. It's all just theater. Because we lack the ability to cleanse ourselves, right? We can't cleanse ourselves. We lack the ability to heal our conscience. Only Jesus can provide that cleansing and forgiveness. I can't wash and purify my hands in the sink, right? Can't turn on the water and purify my hands in that sense. But, as James points out, I can purify my hands if I turn to the Lord, by turning to God. That's about the only way to do that, right? So, verse 18. So you may have yeah.
You know, I don't disagree with you as far as Pilate's thoughts here, I guess his actions, but I wonder if there ain't a little bit of good in the guy. I mean, to me, it looks to me like he says there in verse 23 when he said, let him be crucified in 23. He says, why? What evil has he done? You know, in a way, just watching and looking at this, it seems to me like, yeah, he's messed up, but the guy maybe isn't all as bad as what we want to make him look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that could very well be the case.
His conscience, I mean, and watching his hands, this whole thing, the blood's on you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it reminds me of what Paul said. You know, when he left, was it Berea, or prior to that maybe, he said, "I'm washing my hands. My hands are clean. Your blood's not on my conscience."
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the same thought here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's true. I think that's definitely a possibility as well. Maybe it's just, you know, he's kind of got a heart. He's not all bad, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe his conscience is getting to him more than the fact that just his wife gave him that message that kind of worried him a little bit. Maybe there's, you know, because there's several different ways you can kind of take it. But what it all comes down to is, I mean,
he's a weak leader.
Yeah.
Very weak leader, but he knows everything's against him too. The crowd, like everybody, is against him. So
well, yeah, he's in a tough spot. I mean, he doesn't want a riot to break out. He knows this guy's innocent. I mean, he knows he's innocent, and it's. I mean, I know that he's in a tough situation. I mean, I don't think that. You know, I wouldn't try to say that this would be something easy that any of us could step into and would make the right call. But we'd hope we would, but, but you know, you don't know. Did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think he was influenced by his wife's dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And she said he was a righteous man.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's worried, like, boy, if I put this guy to death, I'm going to be in big trouble.
Yeah.
So he figured, I'll just push it off to them.
Yeah, and it could kind of be a combination of all this stuff. You know, he kind of feels like this guy's innocent. His wife is saying this guy's innocent. There's all these things. He's just kind of like, you know, I mean, because when you're in leadership, I mean, it's hard to know what to do sometimes, right? And you got all these different sides pulling on you, and you've got your own ideas and your own thoughts that are kind of tugging at you, and it's hard to do the right thing. So those are good thoughts.
I think he was already kind of impressed with Jesus because Jesus didn't defend himself.
Yeah.
You know, it said he marveled.
Yeah, it's true. That's true.
Because you'd think he'd be begging for his life or something. A regular person probably would.
He's already not reacting the way he expected him to react, right. Which is kind of the story of Jesus' life, right? The whole time we've been going through the book of Matthew, Jesus isn't doing what everybody expects him to do. Even here at the end of his life, he's not doing what they're expecting him to do. Mark?
I think it's kind of interesting, you know, you look at Judas, he was the man for the job. Pilate was the man for the job. And God's will be done, whether it's somebody else or, you know, God uses us when we don't realize that we're being influenced to do the good work that he wants us to do. Whether it's good or bad, that effect carries over, and he was the man for the job.
Yeah, and like we pointed out last class, I think Laura was bringing up the fact that, you know, this had to go down. This all had to happen, you know. And so you've got these players that are making this happen, and that, you know, and it's just, yeah, can't always, you know, say why they did what they did, but what it all comes down to is, you know, this all did have to happen, however the pieces were arranged. So,
you know, the part in 25 where he says, where they say, and all the people answered, his blood be upon us and our children. Do you think that's like a prophecy of the future of the Jewish nation being persecuted like they still are today? Do you think that's somewhat of a prophecy?
I don't think that they thought that that was they were gonna get called out on that. As far as a prophecy goes, I mean, I guess you could in a sense. I mean, they are gonna incur some judgment and such, right? So I guess in that sense, but I think it's basically they're just saying that because they're like, hey, this isn't really the Messiah, and so they're not really expecting that they're gonna face a consequence for this. They think he's just gonna die and go away, and then people are gonna turn back to the leaders that are there, right? So, in a way, but I don't really think that that's necessarily a prophecy, although it does kind of prophesy what is going to happen, that is going to come. Because, yeah, when we get into Acts, you're going to see, I mean, they're going to get up there and they're going to say, you know, his blood is on you. And they're not going to like that so much.
You know, and I think there's a comparison between the people at that time and today in the fact that these people didn't care that much about their own children, that they knew that if they get it, they were all gonna die.
Yeah, but I don't think that they thought that he was the Messiah. So I don't think they thought they were putting their kids in danger.
And that's going on today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Gary?
I was just gonna add, you know, that in Pilate's defense here, which is bad side to take probably, but even as leaders in the church, we've seen time and time again, things come up that we should act upon, disfellowship maybe in one case, or corrective measures, and we've been very slow, to say the least, in acting, because we don't wanna drive somebody away, we don't wanna hurt somebody's feelings or whatever, so we just kinda put it off, you know, and say, well, it'll work out or whatever. In a sense, I think this is part of what Pilate's doing here. He don't know what to do, and he's doing his best to make himself feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And that's difficult sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think when you're in that leadership position, you don't always know what to do. You don't always have the answers. You try.
Do what you know you should do.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's a good point. You might have anything you want to add, Travis?
I think he was kind of caught in a pickle. I mean,
Yeah, I think he was.
He definitely was in charge of the Romans there, and if the people revolted, he only had so many soldiers. And if Rome had to send more soldiers and take them away from the regular garrisons, he'd be out of a job real quickly.
Yeah, he might be dead.
So, you know,
He might be executed. Pilate, I think you're right. I think there might be even more to what's going on with Pilate in behind the scenes. And you know, I don't know. I've read some things to where you know, I can't say it's from the scripture necessarily, but just through history, I've read some things talking about how Pilate was kind of in trouble a little bit already anyway. And if that's the case, and this crowd that he's supposed to be taking care of revolts, then you know, it may be that those over him are like, you're out, and you're out probably means you're dead. So if at the worst case scenario, best case scenario, you might be exiled or something. But yeah, so I think Pilate had a lot of stuff going on. I don't know everything that was going on behind the scenes. Don't know everything that was going on in his mind. I know we can speculate to some of that stuff, but it is interesting to think about, right?
Well, you have a different perspective when you read the other Gospels too.
Yeah.
Because you kind of figure out that in John, the book of John, Pilate was faced with the big thing. Jesus is calling himself the Son of God. We're hearing that. Well, that's a direct slap in the face of Caesar. So at that point, he kind of has to hand him over if he wants to save himself.
Yeah,
So
kind of forcing his hand there a little bit.
yeah, and that was a big deal. Caesar wanted to be called the Son of God. I don't think he got that honor until after he died, but you know. Yeah. I think Pilate was under a lot of pressure. I think he was between a rock and a hard place, and this is where it all ended up. And
it had to end up this way, and that may be why there was so much stuff going on. But yeah, it is interesting to kind of think about. Anybody else have anything they wanted to add? In verse 18, I was thinking it's interesting because it says that he knew that it was out of envy that the chief priests and the elders had delivered him up. So he knew that this was out of envy. And so another thing, when it goes back to kind of what Pilate was thinking, and maybe what he had going on in his mind there, he may have been thinking, well, hey, if they're envious of Jesus, then that must mean that Jesus has the favor of the crowds. You know, Jesus has the followers, right? And I mean, these guys are jealous and envious of Jesus because the crowds have been following him instead of them. And so, you know, since I know these guys are all envious of Jesus, it must mean that the people like Jesus more. And so Barabbas could be his out, or maybe he's thinking this is his out here, because they'll obviously choose Jesus over Barabbas because they like Jesus more, right? And that may be kind of what he's thinking as far as all this is concerned. However, the chief priests and the scribes have obviously been busy because, you know, you would think it'd be a no-brainer, right? Who do we need to release? And you have this notorious, I don't know everything, I don't know all he did, but he was obviously a bad guy, right? And then you have Jesus. So it seemed like it'd be a pretty obvious thing, but the chief priests and the rulers obviously knew how to gin up the crowd, and so that they would ask for Barabbas instead of Jesus. And they did that to the point to where they were saying, you know, his blood be on us and on our children. So they were really able to get this crowd all ginned up and turn them against Jesus. You know, I mean, they're telling Pilate, look, you don't have to feel guilty about this. You know, we'll take any judgment that comes from this. We'll accept this. So these scribes and chief priests must have been pretty persuasive to be able to get the people to turn on him like that.
You know, when I think of Paul and look at his attitude, even, you know, after the church was established and he was persecuting the church and Christians and that, I can understand it. I can see as committed as he was to Judaism or whatever. I mean, I can see why their attitude was such as it was. Get rid of him, kill him. He might be a threat.
Yeah, I can see that. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, that could be the big thing. I mean, it was a threat to definitely to the scribes, and so for all the leaders there, they're envious of this guy. They want to get rid of him, but yeah, they're able to persuade the crowd. And so Barabbas is released, and Jesus goes to the cross in his stead. So you got this guy who is obviously guilty, and yet he gets released. And then you've got another guy who's innocent, and Pilate knows that he's innocent, and Pilate's wife knows that he's innocent, and I think the council actually knows that he's innocent. You know, I think some of these false witnesses who were involved in this kangaroo court, I think they probably know that he is innocent. So there's a whole lot of folks who know that Jesus is innocent. And so the innocent goes to the cross in the place of the guilty. And of course, you know, we want to be children of God because it's the children of God who Jesus is standing in the place of, right? It's the children of God that Jesus has taken, or that he is the sacrifice for. And you become a child of God, of course, by being in Jesus Christ. And when we're in Jesus Christ, the righteous requirement of the law is fulfilled. So here's the interesting thing. Barabbas wakes up that day knowing that he's going to die, that he's got it coming. He's done some terrible things, whatever those happen to be. I don't really know what all those things are. He was notorious, but he had done some awful things, and there's just no way out of that, except for there is a way out, because Jesus is there, and Jesus is going to go to the cross in his place. I just think this is a really powerful picture of the way the gospel works. I just think this is the picture right here. When you're trying to see what is the gospel, this is a picture of how the gospel works. Jesus, the innocent, goes to the cross in place of the innocent. Jesus goes to the cross. Or in place of the guilty. I think I said that wrong, but y'all know what I meant. Jesus goes to the cross, and Jesus dies for our sins. And when he's on the cross, he is the sacrifice of satisfaction. He is appeasing the wrath of God. And, it should have been Barabbas on that cross. It should have been me on that cross. It should have been you on that cross. But Jesus is on the cross, taking the wrath of God and being the sinless the sinless sacrifice for sinners like us. And then, of course, in Romans 5 and verse 6, it says, "For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. More than that, we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation." Jesus is the reconciliation. He's the one who brings peace between us and the Father. When we were enemies, when we were at war, when we were guilty, when we were ungodly sinners, and the wrath of God was justly coming for us. But Jesus willingly steps in between us and God's wrath, and he lays down his life for us. So Barabbas is set free and escapes the wrath that he deserves, and Jesus endures it instead. And I'd love to know what Barabbas did with that second chance that he got. It doesn't tell us, but I just think it would be fascinating to know what he did with that. And I think that we can ask that same question of ourselves. What am I going to do with my second chance? Because Jesus went to the cross for me to set me free from my sin. So what am I going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? Are you going to continue to live for yourself? Or are you going to die to self and serve him by serving others? All right? So I think that's an interesting thing that we can take away from this whole story of Barabbas. This is the gospel. This is the way it works. He takes our place. He gives us a second chance. Sin, and we can go out there and we can live for him, or we can continue living in sin and be lost. So, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm curious. If Pontius knew so much about Jesus and what his background was, why did he let the people beat him before they hung him?
Yeah.
Wouldn't one thing be bad enough?
He had him scourged and delivered over to be crucified.
That means beaten.
Is interesting. I wondered that too. Because that kind of goes along with, if he, whatever reason he did the things that he did, whenever he does finally hand them over to the people, he does have them scourged first, which is not a pleasant thing at all. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess that's just kind of the progression
Yeah, 'cause
of
he-
it. Maybe it's
he
just
had
the way
to
they
know
did
that
it.
Jesus was there for the people
Mhm.
and for him too.
Mhm.
So then, why did, he was at the top of the line for saying yes, no.
Mhm.
Why couldn't he put the stuff on it and say, I wash my hands of the whole thing too?
You mean, why didn't he stop the whole thing? Yeah, I mean, he could have stopped the whole thing, but he would have had a riot on his hands if he did that. But yeah, it is interesting. I don't know why he was scourged first. Anybody else have anything they want to add before everyone comes in? Marcia?
If others were watching the scourging, maybe he was thinking they would like relent and say, you know,
Yeah.
oh, well, we haven't seen him do that bad of stuff, which he didn't do any bad stuff. but
Because, yeah, that's pretty harsh.
Brutal.
Pretty brutal,
I
yeah.
see that.
Yeah.
Well, if a riot did happen, Pilate would be on the chopping block.
Doing it?
If a riot did happen, Pilate's job, his wife probably would be on the chopping block, because he didn't have very much tolerance for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. All right. Anything else?